College students taking introductory courses dealing with Texas government have been taught for decades that the structure of the Texas executive branch is, in important ways, unlike the structure of the executive branch of the United States government. The basic model of the United States government can efficiently be represented by this organizational chart, indicating the three branches of government: legislative, judicial, and a hierarchically structured executive branch. The U.S. President appoints his cabinet, subject to approval by the United States Senate, as well as sub-cabinet level agency administrators, board members, and commissioners at the scores of independent establishments and government corporations. The lines of responsibility and authority suggest that the President is a true chief executive, with subordinate executives reporting to and accountable to the President. The temptation, then, is to apply this model to the structure of Texas government, where we find the three familiar branches of government: legislative, judicial, and executive. We might assume that the executive machinery of state government is analogous to the national, with the governor as chief executive, appointing cabinet-level officers and sub-cabinet-level agency heads, board members, and commissioners. Under such a structure, we would assume that authority flows from the governor's status as chief executive. All lines of responsibility and accountability are traced to the governor's authority. However, the reality of Texas government is quite different. The Texas Constitution does indicate that the governor of the state shall be the chief executive. However, this designation is primarily stylistic. In other words, the authority, responsibility, and accountability of much of the executive branch in Texas does not trace to the governor. Texas simply does not employ this model of government. Instead, under the Texas Constitution, Texas has a plural executive arrangement, under which Texas voters separately elect, in addition to the governor, several other executives, including the lieutenant governor, the Commissioner of Agriculture, the Attorney General, the Commissioner of the General Land Office, the Comptroller of Public Accounts, the members of the State Board of Education, the members of the Texas Railroad Commission. The fact that these officers are elected rather than appointed gives them considerable independence from the governor, since these officers can claim that they owe their offices to the voters of the state and not to the governor. Additionally, they derive their authority from the state's constitution rather than from the governor, making it difficult for the governor to devise a cohesive policy agenda and coordinate the implementation of state programs and services. Indeed, there have been some classic public confrontations between Texas governors and other constitutional executives, such as the Attorney General, the Comptroller of Public Accounts, or the Agricultural Commissioner. The governor does have the authority to appoint many other executive officials, but the fact of the plural executive arrangement at the constitutional level prevents the governor from operating as a true chief executive. So, what we have seen here is that the Texas governor has no authority to form a cabinet as the president does at the national level. The Constitution of 1876 created the plural executive structure with separately elected executive officers. Although the governor does appoint some members of citizen boards and commissions, most analysts agree that the office of the governor is institutionally weak. Comparative analyses of formal authority among chief executives in the United States have typically ranked the Texas governor very low, as one of the 3 or 4 weakest chief executives among American governments. As you can see here, an analysis by the Council of State Governments in 2002 ranked the Texas governor on a scale of 1 to 7, along with the governors of Florida, Indiana, and South Carolina, as very weak. In contrast, the governors of Illinois, Maryland, Minnesota, Missouri, New Jersey, Tennessee, Virginia, Alaska, and Delaware were ranked as very strong, while the formal executive powers of the United States President and the governors of more than a dozen states were judged to be moderate. What sort of factors does this sort of analysis and similar analysis consider when ranking the formal authority of a chief executive. Such analyses will take into account a half dozen or so factors to create an index of formal authority. Typically, analysts want to know several things. Does the chief executive initiate the budget process? That is, does the formulation of the government's budget begin in the chief executive's office and therefore reflect the budgetary priorities of the chief executive from the outset of the budget process? Does the legislature, that is the state legislature or the United States Congress at the national level, then use the budget that is formulated by the chief executive as a template for the budget that it will ultimately pass? Here we see that the Texas governor typically scores very low on such indices, since the formulation of the state's budget is the purview of the Legislative Budget Board, which operates under the direction of the presiding officers of the Texas House of Representatives and the Texas Senate, that is, the Speaker of the House and the Lieutenant Governor, respectively. Second, is the chief executive the chief budget execution officer? So we have a consideration concerning budget formulation and a consideration concerning budget execution. That is the government's budget, once passed by the legislature, implemented under the direction of the chief executive? Again, on this measure, the Texas governor scores very low, since responsibility for the execution of the budget for each department, agency, or commission generally rests with the officer overseeing that part of the executive branch. For example, the Commissioner of Agriculture is responsible for the execution of the budget for the Department of Agriculture. The Attorney General is responsible for the execution of the budget of the Attorney General's office, and so on. Next, does the chief executive have a veto power over bills passed by the legislature? Can the legislature override the chief executive's veto? Does an override vote in the legislature require an extraordinary majority? Does the chief executive have a line item veto power? Can the legislature override a line item veto? Such considerations are taken up here by political analysts. On this measure, the Texas governor typically scores somewhat higher. The Texas governor does have the constitutional power to veto a bill passed by the Texas legislature. While the legislature can override the governor's veto, the state constitution requires a 2/3 vote by both chambers of the state legislature to accomplish it, making veto overrides very rare. This is typically viewed by analysts as an indicator of enhanced executive authority. Importantly, given the comparatively short regular sessions of the Texas legislature, recall that the Texas legislature meets in biennial sessions for 140 days, the opportunity for the legislature to override gubernatorial vetoes is very limited, since the legislature is likely to have adjourned by the time the governor disposes of many bills. This fact makes the Texas governor's veto power, as a practical matter, a nearly absolute veto. The Texas governor also enjoys the line item veto authority. This gives the governor the authority to veto specific lines in the state's omnibus appropriations bill, that is, the state budget, while signing the bulk of the bill into law. This authority can be a source of considerable authority for the governor. For example, in 2009, former Governor Rick Perry used this authority to strike nearly $300 million from the state's budget for programs he did not support. Most state governors have the line item veto authority. Interestingly, the United States President does not have this authority, although many people believe or support the idea of giving the President this power to enforce budgetary discipline on the federal government. During the presidency of Bill Clinton, Congress passed legislation giving the President line item veto authority on appropriations bills. The United States Supreme Court, however, struck down the act of Congress, holding that Congress cannot add to or delete from the powers of the President through the ordinary legislative process. Changes in the President's powers, including giving the President the line item veto power, would require formal constitutional amendment. Next, does the chief executive possess the ability to reorganize the agencies and departments of the government by issuing executive orders? Here, the authority of the Texas governor is virtually non-existent, given the fact that much of the state's executive machinery is established by the state's constitution. Reorganizations would normally require formal amendment to accomplish. Does the chief executive have the authority to name his or her cabinet? As we have already noted, Texas does not employ the cabinet model. Instead, we have the plural executive arrangement. Consequently, the Texas governor scores very low on these measures. What is the tenure potential of the chief executive? What is the term of office? Is it 2 years? Is it 4 years? Is there a limit on the number of terms that a chief executive can serve? For many decades, the Texas Constitution limited the governor's term of office to 2 years. That provision of the state constitution was amended in the 1970s, extending the term to 4 years. Additionally, there is no formal limit on the number of terms a governor may serve in Texas. Consequently, this is a measure on which the Texas governor tends to score a bit higher. The absence of term limits can, in fact, greatly enhance the governor's ability to control the makeup of many of the state's boards and commissions, since the governor does have the authority to appoint these officers. Much of the legacy of former Governor Rick Perry was accomplished as a result of his extremely long tenure. Perry had been serving as lieutenant governor of the state when George W. Bush resigned the governor's office in 2001 to assume the office of President of the United States. Perry served out the remainder of the Bush term as governor and was subsequently elected to the office in 2002 and then again in 2006 and 2010. This is important because over the course of just one term of office, the governor's opportunity to make appointments are somewhat limited by the fact that many appointed officers serve terms of appointment longer than the governor's 4-year term, as well as by the fact that the members of many boards and commissions serve staggered terms. For example, the Texas Public Utilities Commission regulates the state's electric, telecommunications, and water and sewer utilities. It has 3 members appointed by the state governor. Current members include Donna L. Nelson, who was first appointed by Governor Rick Perry to the commission on August 15, 2008, and named chairman of the commission on July 26, 2011. In 2011, Governor Perry also appointed Kenneth Anderson for a term on the commission to end in August of 2017. And in August 2013, Perry appointed Brandy Marty Marquez for a term to end in 2019. Incoming governors then often have to live with the appointments of their predecessors. When current Governor Greg Abbott assumed his office in January 2015, all 3 members of the Public Utility Commission were already in place as a result of the appointments of Abbott's predecessor, Rick Perry. Abbott subsequently reappointed Nelson on September 10, 2015 for a term to expire in September of 2021. So, despite the fact that the Texas governor's appointive powers are somewhat limited by the fact of the plural executive, over multiple terms of office, a governor may be able to exert substantial influence over the direction of state agencies through the appointment power, as Governor Perry was able to do. While political scientists have, for many years, generally concluded based on comparative indices that measures of formal executive powers that the Texas governor is a weak chief executive, more recently political scientists have sought ways to measure informal indicators of gubernatorial power. The most notable of these analysts, Tad Beal, developed an index of informal power that includes several factors. These factors are not attributed to the institution of the governor's office, rather to the characteristics of the person who is occupying the office. Many observers of Texas government agree that these are factors that can be used by a skillful politician to enhance the formal powers of the governor's office. Essentially, Beal's index poses a number of important questions about the occupant of the office. can the governor claim an electoral mandate? By how many percentage points did the governor win the office in the most recent election? Did the governor win by a landslide of 11 or more percentage points? Would it be better described as a comfortable win with a margin of 6 to 10 percentage points? Was it a narrow majority win defined as 3 to 5 percentage points? A tight victory with a majority of 0 to 2 percentage points, or even a bare plurality victory? So, for example, in the 2014 governor's race between Republican candidate Greg Abbott and Democratic candidate Wendy Davis, Abbott won by a margin of 59% to 39%, a margin of 20 percentage points. In Bill's framework, then, this could translate into significant informal power for Governor Abbott, since the governor can claim the electoral mandate that results from a landslide victory. By contrast, in 2006 gubernatorial race, Rick Perry, the incumbent Republican candidate, faced a challenge not only from the Democratic Party candidate Chris Bell, but two unusually popular independent candidates, Kinky Friedman and former Texas Comptroller of Public Accounts Carol Keaton Strayhorn. Perry won the election, but with only a plurality of the vote, 39% for Perry to 30% for Bell, and 13% for Friedman and 18% for Strayhorn. On Beall's index, then, Perry would have ranked low on this measure for that term of office, since over 60% of the votes were cast for some candidate other than Rick Perry. This fact would likely make it difficult for the governor to claim that voters were overwhelmingly giving their stamp of approval to his campaign agenda. This might make governing difficult for the governor over the next 4 years. However, in 2010, Perry recovered nicely, scoring a 13-point victory over his Democratic opponent, City of Houston Mayor Bill White. So, for his final term of office as governor, then, as a result of his landslide victory over Bill White, Perry could claim an electoral mandate. The next factor examines the governor's climb up the political ladder, so to speak. Does the governor's history as a politician show steady progression? Did he or she move up from lower offices to the governor's mansion? For example, Rick Perry's political career illustrates steady progression up the political ladder. Perry began his political career as a member of the Texas House of Representatives, elected from a rural district in North Texas from 1985 to 1991. From there, he won statewide office, elected to the office of the Agriculture Commissioner, where he served from 1991 to 1999. In 1999, Perry moved on to the Texas Lieutenant Governor's office, which we have established as a very powerful office in the state's politics. However, Perry served a relatively brief one-year tenure in that office, as he resigned the post to assume the governor's office when George W. Bush resigned the governor's office to become President of the United States. Perry then would score very high on this factor on Bill's index, since he shows a steady climb up the political ladder. By contrast, Bill Clements, who served as governor from 1979 to 1983, was elected as the state's chief executive without having previously held any elective office. Consequently, as a political novice, Clements seemed to struggle and had difficulty wielding personal political influence. Clements was defeated in his re-election bid in 1982, but returned to the political arena in the 1986 governor's race, which he won for a second, though non-consecutive term. Next on the Beall Index poses a series of questions that consider the governor's personal political future. Is the governor early or late in his term of office? Can the governor run for re-election? If the governor is early in his term and can run for re-election to the office, the governor scores relatively high on this factor. If the governor is late in his term or cannot run again. For example, if the state has term limits for the governor scores on the low end. The current Texas governor, Greg Abbott, is in early 2017 able to run for re-election. Whether he will be successful in his re-election effort is not only undetermined at this point, but really is not relevant to his ranking on this factor, so long as it is generally believed that he might seek re-election. Abbott then would rank fairly high at this time on this factor. Next, how does the public perceive how well the governor is performing his or her job? The higher the governor's approval rating, that is, the higher the percentage of the public who approves of the way that the governor performs his or her job, the more that translates into personal political power. Lower approval ratings weaken the governor's personal political influence. Other analysts consider other factors that might contribute to or detract from the governor's personal political influence. How effectively does the governor use the staff at his or her disposal? Does the governor have the ability to use television, radio, the internet, or other mass media to get his or her message out to the voters and shape opinion, or perhaps to apply pressure to other politicians with whom he or she must work, such as members of the state legislature or other executives in the state's plural executive arrangement? Obviously, some governors are better at these skills than others. Click on the link provided on the Blackboard course website to familiarize yourself with some of the additional information provided in a slideshow presentation on the Texas Executive Branch.